Some stories stay with you long after you've heard them. They aren't just tales of the strange or the unexplained, they're experiences that make you question what you know about the world around you. Tonight, we'll dive into the eerie and unsettling accounts of people who have seen things most of us can only imagine. From isolated deserts to dense forests, these stories remind us that some mysteries are better left unexplored. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for the unknown. My name is Carter, and I served as a military field engineer for 8 years. My role was mainly technical, building structures, repairing equipment, and ensuring our bases were secure. But I also spent a lot of time in remote areas, places where the silence was so complete that it felt almost unnatural. In those quiet spaces, far from the noise of civilization, you start to notice things you wouldn't otherwise. And sometimes, those things aren't easy to explain. It was late autumn, and my unit had been deployed to a dense forest region for a routine training exercise. The area was isolated, with thick trees that stretched so high they blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the ground covered in shadows even during the day. We were tasked with setting up a temporary command post deep in the woods, which meant clearing some land, setting up communications, and ensuring everything was operational. Our camp was small, just a few tents and basic equipment, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. At night, the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of an owl. Most of the guys in my unit joked about how creepy the place felt, but we chalked it up to the eerie quiet and the natural unease that comes with being in such a remote area. One night, after a long day of work, I volunteered for the late-night watch. It was standard protocol to have someone awake at all times, just in case. Armed with my rifle and a thermos of coffee, I settled into a small clearing near the edge of our camp. The fire we had built earlier was still smoldering, casting faint orange light across the clearing. For the first few hours, everything was uneventful. I walked the perimeter a couple of times, checked our equipment, and tried to keep myself awake. But around 2 a.m., I started to feel odd. It wasn't fear exactly, but a deep, unsettling sense that I wasn't alone. I stopped walking and listened, straining to hear beyond the usual forest sounds. Nothing seemed out of place, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the trees. The beam of light illuminated the trunks, branches, and underbrush, but nothing seemed unusual. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I radioed to the command tent, asking if anyone else was awake or had seen anything strange, but the response was negative. Then, I saw it, a faint movement in the shadows about 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a fox. But as I focused, I realized it was standing too still, too upright. Whatever it was, it didn't seem to move like an animal. The figure was just barely visible, blending into the darkness so well that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady but firm. No response. I repeated the question, but the figure remained silent and still. Slowly, I raised my rifle, aiming just above it. "I need you to identify yourself," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. Without warning, the figure moved, not toward me, but sideways, disappearing behind a tree in a way that seemed impossibly fast. I ran to the spot where I'd seen it, flashlight sweeping the area, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate anyone or anything had been there at all. Second story. My name is Miguel, and I served as a medic in a reconnaissance unit for nearly a decade. My job was to ensure that, No matter how far out we were or how bad the situation got, I could keep my team alive until we made it back to base. In the field, you see a lot of things that stay with you, some that make you stronger and others that leave you questioning everything. This is one of those times. It was during a winter deployment in a mountainous region. The air was thin and cold, and the snow blanketed everything in an eerie stillness. Our mission was straightforward: scout the terrain, map out any potential hazards, and monitor enemy activity. We were stationed at a small outpost built into the side of the mountain. It was basic: a few barracks, a watchtower, and a single road that wound down into the valley below. One night, we received a distress call from a neighboring unit. They had reported seeing strange lights in the forested valley, close to where some of their men had gone missing earlier that week. Our orders were to investigate and provide assistance if needed. A team of 5, including me, geared up and headed out. The descent into the valley was slow and treacherous. The snow was fresh, making it hard to distinguish the road from the surrounding wilderness. By the time we reached the forest, the moonlight barely penetrated through the dense canopy of trees. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, but even with them, visibility was poor. We followed the coordinates provided in the distress call, but after about an hour, the signal suddenly cut out. All we had was a faint trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. It didn't take long for us to notice something strange. The footprints weren't consistent. They'd appear for a while, then vanish completely, only to reappear several meters ahead, as if whoever made them had been lifted off the ground and set down again. "Could be the snow," our squad leader muttered, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. As we pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that settles deep into your bones. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a low hum, almost imperceptible. It wasn't the wind, nor was it any animal I'd ever heard. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, growing louder the farther we went. When we finally reached the coordinates, we found an old, abandoned cabin. It was small, weathered by time and the elements, with its roof caved in on one side. There was no sign of the other unit, but the footprints led directly to the cabin's door. Against my better judgment, we decided to check it out. The inside was as desolate as the outside: broken furniture, rotting wood, and a thick layer of dust that suggested no one had been there for years. But the hum was louder now, pulsating like it was alive. It was coming from below us. We found a hatch beneath a rotting rug, leading to a dark, narrow staircase. My gut screamed at me to stop, to turn around and leave, but duty compelled us to go on. We descended into what looked like an old storage cellar, but it was empty, except for the hum, which now felt almost deafening. Then the lights on our helmets flickered, and for a split second, I saw something. It was in the corner, a shape that didn't quite fit, like my eyes couldn't process it properly. It moved, or maybe it didn't. I honestly can't say for sure. But in that moment, the hum stopped, and everything went silent. Too silent. Last story. My name is William, and I served as a logistics officer in a remote forward operating base for several years. My job wasn't glamorous: coordinating supplies, managing inventory, ensuring that every piece of equipment got where it needed to be. But in isolated locations, the lines between the mundane and the unsettling can blur. This is a story I never thought I'd tell. It happened during a deployment in a desolate desert region. Our base was small, surrounded by miles of barren land with nothing but dry, cracked earth and jagged rocks as far as the eye could see. The nearest village was a good 2-hour drive, and most of our interactions with the locals were routine: trading supplies, assisting with medical aid, that sort of thing. One night, I was overseeing a late delivery of equipment. A convoy had gotten delayed, and by the time they arrived, it was close to midnight. The desert at night is a different world, pitch black, save for the pale glow of the moon, and unnervingly quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As the convoy was unloaded, I noticed one of the drivers staring off into the distance. His face was pale, his eyes wide with unease. When I asked if he was okay, he just shook his head and muttered something about seeing someone out there. I chalked it up to fatigue. Long drives and little sleep could mess with anyone's head. After the delivery was finished, I decided to take a quick walk around the perimeter to clear my mind. The base was well lit, but the light only reached so far before fading into darkness. As I approached the edge of the floodlight's reach, something caught my eye, a faint glow, far out in the desert. At first, I thought it might be a vehicle or a campfire, but it didn't flicker like firelight, nor did it move like headlights. It was just there. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a pair of binoculars. Through the lenses, the glow appeared to be coming from a figure. It was faint, almost translucent, and impossible to make out any features. It stood still, as if watching. My stomach churned. I lowered the binoculars and called out to the guard on duty in the tower. "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the glow. He scanned the area with his scope and froze. "Yeah, but what the hell is it?" Before I could respond, the figure moved, slowly, deliberately, but not toward us. It seemed to glide over the ground, heading toward the jagged rocks in the distance. I radioed the command tent, reporting what we'd seen. They dismissed it as either a trick of the light or a local wandering too close to the base. But I knew what I saw wasn't normal. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The guard in the tower radioed that he'd keep an eye on me as I ventured out with a flashlight and sidearm. The desert was eerily silent, the crunch of my boots on the rocky ground the only sound. The glow was no longer visible, but I kept heading toward where I'd last seen it. About halfway there, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I stopped, scanning the darkness with my flashlight, but there was nothing. Just the endless expanse of desert. Then, I heard it, a low, rhythmic sound, almost like chanting, carried on the wind. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pinpoint, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the rocks, there was no sign of the figure or the glow. But in the sand, I found something that froze me in place, footprints. They weren't military boots or anything I recognized. They were bare, human-like, but elongated, with toes that seemed to curl unnaturally into the ground. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we see clearly, but the ones we can't fully understand. These stories remind us that the unknown is often closer than we think, lurking just beyond the edges of our perception. If you've enjoyed these unsettling tales, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. And remember, next time you find yourself alone in the dark, maybe you're not as alone as you think. Stay safe, and until next time.